Hello and welcome to Afternoon Tea with Karen. Ages ago, I read this book. It's a bit of a tough read because Ari Ben Menashe is not a novelist, he was an arms dealer.
Let's go to General David Petraeus, the former CIA director. You know him well as the retired U.S. Army general, KKR partner, Global Institute chairman. General, very good to have you. What do you think happened
Good to
here?
be with you.
Do you think that Navalny was murdered?
I do. I think that's the general, very broad consensus. Really quite stunning, but in some ways, he lived longer than I think many of us actually thought he would. Of course, he barely survived the effort to poison him before. I remember he would receive treatment in Germany, recovered, and the courageous anti-Putin, anti-corruption, anti-Russian Federation, as it has turned out to be, crusader that he was, he went back to Russia knowing that he would be arrested on arrival. He was. He's endured incredible hardship, essentially penal colonies, often in solitary confinement, and really somewhat amazing that he was allowed to live as long as he has, given how effective he was in exposing the corruption, the lavish $1.3 billion palace that Putin had built for himself in the Black Sea and so forth. Been a major thorn in Putin's side, the most effective and clearly the most courageous of his political opponents. And now he is no more. And also, by the way, in the latest election that's going to be held, the one individual who is starting to get a bit of traction in opposing Putin has been declared ineligible to run for office. So anyone who had any remaining illusions about the Russian Federation and its similarity to a mafia state, I hope no longer has those.
General, we know President Biden is convinced, as you are, that Vladimir Putin was behind this. He didn't link him to an outright assassination, but that he was behind this. I'm not sure semantically, sir, the difference.
American politicians and the media is mourning the death of racist and xenophobe Alexei Navalny as a hero and a victim of Vladimir Putin and his regime. Now, they're doing this to sell you a war with Russia, but if you look into who this guy truly is and how little we know about what happened to him, you will not accept this as a reason for any war. Now, Alexei Navalny died in prison today after reportedly suffering from a blood clot. The Federal Penitentiary Service of Russia reported that he fell ill after taking a walk. He lost consciousness, and medical staff did try to resuscitate him, but were unable. President Biden used the occasion for a live press conference in rare form. Every politician is ringing in with outrage, saying this shows that Putin is a madman, Russia is evil. Oh, but he was a political prisoner, the West says. He was poisoned by the Russians. He was Putin's biggest threat. None of this is true. I'm going to tell you what we do know about Alexei Navalny before he became this media darling, because it was easy to use it as a hit to Russia and Putin. Let's tackle just these 4 questions. Number 1, was he really a hero worth championing? Number 2, was he poisoned specifically by the Russian government? Number 3, was he wrongfully imprisoned? And number 4, was he actually Putin's main opponent? A lot of this comes from Jacques Baude's great book, The Navalny Case, Conspiracy to Serve Foreign Policy. So it's a great book. I'm going to recommend that you read it for yourself.
Dass wir das hier zeigen, sondern
лицемерие нейтральности, аполитичности, самоустранения, прикрывающее...
this was a searing indictment of Vladimir Putin by Volodymyr Zelensky. He used all those expressions and challenged those in the room and essentially the Western world, asking them, well, if you want to still live in a rules-based world, you have to defeat Putin. And he says, instead of asking when the war in Ukraine will end, ask yourself why Vladimir Putin is still able to conduct that very war. He thanked the German Chancellor, the French President, for just signing a bilateral security agreement in the previous days, as the one that was signed with the UK several weeks ago. He said that Ukraine was doing its utmost, 724 days of resistance to Ukraine. He said that to Russia, I'm sorry. He said that this has broken the myth that Ukraine doesn't exist as a country, that Russia's military is all powerful, and that Europe was weak and unable to respond. However, he said that this needs to continue because, again, an argument we've heard again and again, that this is not Ukraine's war, this is Europe's war. And he also said that this concerns other parts of the world, Africa, Latin America, Asia as well, because this was really a defining moment. And he said that the struggle should continue. Obviously, the support should continue. He's hoping that in addition to the security agreements I just mentioned with key European countries, there will be much needed support from Washington, namely that the House of Representatives will take up and vote a bill that would fund and arm Ukraine. This is seen as a key moment because this is seen as a symbol of whether the West still believes that it needs to continue fighting for Ukraine or eventually push the Ukrainians toward a negotiating table with Vladimir Putin. With the death of Alexei Navalny, clearly Volodymyr Zelensky told the West, well, know who you're dealing with and don't force us to sit down with this man at the table. This is not the right moment. This is not the right person. And this is when the future needs to be defined. Obviously, strong words. But the reality is that on the front lines, there is a stalemate. And obviously, Ukraine was forced to withdraw from the town of Avdiivka. There was a long and terrible fight where tons of lives were lost on both sides. Ukraine was forced to withdraw. But Volodymyr Zelensky is hoping that this is not the way the combat is going to happen on the front lines, but this is only something that just happened, and he's hoping to regain the momentum.
At the time of his death in 1940, Major General Smedley Butler was the most highly decorated Marine in US history. In a book published in 1935, he wrote, "War is a racket. It always has been. It's possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is the only one international in scope. It is the only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and the losses in lives." Let's imagine a man like Major General Butler knew what he was talking about when it came to the subject of war. As well as physically brave, I would say he was morally courageous to the end of his days. He said that during his 33 years of active military service, he spent most of his time as a, quote, high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers. In short, he said, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. A racket is best described, he said, as something that is not what it seems to the majority of the people. Only a small inside group knows what it's about. It's conducted for the benefit of the very few at the expense of the very many. Out of war, a few people make huge fortunes. I would say it's plain to see that the racket has been going from strength to strength ever since. In his farewell address to the American people in 1961, outgoing President and old soldier Dwight D. Eisenhower warned about the threat posed by what he was already able to identify as the military-industrial complex. Quote, "This conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications." This conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new. We must not fail to comprehend its implications. In the councils of government, we must guard against acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Now, nearly 90 years after Smedley's assessment of the cynical nature of war, the billions of dollars, pounds, euros and the rest continue to flow into the coffers and bank accounts of the few. And who are the few, those beneficiaries of the endless firing of bullets and bombs? ghouls who see loss of human life only in terms of profitable columns on their balance sheets. It's a tragically accurate adage that young men who don't know each other and don't hate each other are sent to war by old men who do know each other and may or may not hate each other, but who shake hands and split the profits when all the young men are dead. We're still right there in that hellscape, hapless witnesses to the ultimate racket, as hundreds of billions of dollars and pounds flow into Ukraine and then back into the bank accounts of that military-industrial complex. Russian dissident Alexei Navalny has died in prison. US President Joe Biden was quickly thrust in front of the world's media to exploit that death to justify the sending of yet more billions of dollars to Zelensky's Ukraine. He said, "We have to provide the funding so Ukraine can keep defending itself. History is watching. The failure to support Ukraine at this crucial moment will never be forgotten." Former President Donald Trump was impeached in 2019 before any Russian tanks had crossed the Ukrainian border for pausing funds already earmarked for Ukraine, $391 million in security assistance, $250 million through the Department of Defence's Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, and $141 million through the State Department's Foreign Military Financing Programme. Trump paused all of that because he wanted to investigate alleged Biden family links to Ukraine and was subsequently impeached. According to Republican Senator J.D. Vance, a new bill proposed by the Biden administration guaranteeing a further $61 billion to Ukraine, money earmarked primarily for US arms manufacturers, has within it a clause leaving any attempt by a future president to halt that funding vulnerable to similar proceedings. This has been described as future-proofing the funding of Ukraine against the possibility that Trump or anyone else in future seeks to interrupt the flow of dollars to Ukraine. Biden mourned Navalny's death. Even in prison, he was a powerful voice for the truth, he said. An interesting statement, while journalist Julian Assange, who published Truth Inconvenient to the US and the West, presently rots in Belmarsh prison as he fights extradition to the US. I'm not yet aware of Biden mentioning, far less lamenting, the death in a Ukrainian prison of US citizen and writer Gonzalo Lira, who was critical of the Zelensky regime. Biden's administration has sought determinedly to jail his and their strongest and most popular opponent, Donald Trump. And yet, in the immediate aftermath of Navalny's death, Biden highlighted Vladimir Putin's desperate attempts to stamp out the opposition. Zelensky, propped up only by Western cash, has crushed his own political opponents as well. The pattern seems clear. Bleat about enemies threatening democracy, while simultaneously and blatantly and hypocritically seeking to trample on democracy at home, or turn a blind eye to the same being carried out by allies, or make that business partners. A legitimate president of Ukraine was overthrown by a US-led coup in 2014. In the early stages of the Russia-Ukraine war, as early as April 2022, a peace deal was on the table until former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was dispatched by NATO to scupper that deal. Now 500,000 Ukrainian men and boys are dead. The war goes on relentlessly, and a US administration is seeking to undermine democracy so that a multi-billion-dollar war might grind on with no end in sight. Here in the UK, our own homegrown brand of warmongers are banging the drums and rattling the sabres. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps has warned that UK is adapting to a pre-war world. Former Minister Tobias Ellwood has declared there is a 1939 feel to the world and that Britain is not prepared. All of that was before retiring Army Chief General Sir Patrick Sanders advocated the training of a citizen army in readiness for a future land war. Ukraine has used up its available generations of men and boys. Now those Ukrainians who absented themselves from the country in advance of the fighting face the possibility, if new legislation is passed there, of having to return to fight or face the seizure of their bank accounts and other assets. Maybe those men will return and maybe they won't. In any event, they won't be enough to satisfy a meat grinder that is being future-proofed against the possibility of its ever running out of steam. Who will be sent next? Whose sons will be cannon fodder in Ukraine? My sons? Your sons? As the Second World War played out, it wasn't equipment that was in short supply.
That'll do. See you later. Bye.